Did you know that one of the strangest movies ever made almost never happened? That's right. The Incredible Shrinking Man from 1957 is a film about a man who keeps getting smaller and smaller, but the real magic happened behind the camera. This movie scared people. It made them think. It asked big questions about what it means to be human when your body keeps changing. The special effects were wild for 1957. The script was heartbreaking. And the story? It will stick with you forever. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about The Incredible Shrinking Man. Fact number 20. The original story came from a paperback novel. Nobody really cared about. Scott Carey, the main character, didn't start his life in a Hollywood studio. He lived first in a paperback science fiction book called The Shrinking Man by Richard Matheson, published in 1956. Now here's the crazy part. The book wasn't a huge bestseller. It wasn't on everyone's shelf. Movie studios weren't fighting over it. But someone at Universal Pictures read it and thought, this is it. This is the movie we need to make. They bought the rights quickly and hired Richard Matheson himself to write the screenplay. Richard didn't just adapt his own book, he made it even better for film. He added scenes, changed moments, and made the ending more powerful. The book was good. The movie became unforgettable. Sometimes the best stories hide in quiet places, waiting for someone brave enough to bring them to life. Fact number 19. The director almost turned it into a comedy, not a tragedy. Jack Arnold was chosen to direct The Incredible Shrinking Man, and he was famous for making science fiction movies that were fun and scary. But here's what almost happened. The studio executives wanted the movie to be lighter. They wanted jokes. They wanted the audience to laugh at a man shrinking instead of feeling sad about his suffering. Jack Arnold said no. He fought hard to keep the movie serious and emotional. He believed that a man losing his body and his place in the world wasn't funny. It was tragic. It was deeply human. Jack won that battle. He kept the darkness. He kept the pain. He kept the real fear that Scott Carey feels as his world grows bigger and bigger around him. The studio took a risk by trusting a director who wanted to make people feel something real instead of something safe. Fact number 18. Grant Williams got stuck inside props that were way too small. Grant Williams played Scott Carey, the shrinking man, and he had to film scenes in tiny spaces. The filmmakers built miniature sets, a giant kitchen, a regular living room that suddenly becomes huge, a basement filled with things that look enormous. Grant had to squeeze himself into spaces that were designed for much smaller actors or for camera tricks. Imagine lying on your stomach in a space the size of a shoebox. That was Grant's day on set. His back hurt. His neck hurt. He couldn't move, but he never complained because he understood something important. The physical discomfort he felt helped him act like a man losing control of his own body. His pain became part of his performance. It looked easy, but it was absolute chaos. Fact number 17. They used real animals that weren't always safe around actors. One of the most famous scenes in the movie shows Scott being chased by a cat. That's not a small cat, it's a normal cat, but Scott is so tiny that it seems like a monster. The filmmakers used a real cat on set, and the cat didn't always cooperate. Sometimes the cat would scratch, sometimes the cat would hiss and attack for real, not pretend. Grant Williams had to act terrified of an animal that was actually dangerous to him. The crew also filmed scenes with a mouse and a spider using real creatures instead of puppets or animation. Working with real animals meant unpredictable moments. It meant real danger mixed with pretend danger. Grant never knew exactly what the cat would do, and that real uncertainty made his acting incredibly believable. That wasn't acting, it was real fear mixed with movie magic. Fact number 16. The Invisible Man technology from 1951 helped create shrinking effects. Universal Studios had already made The Invisible Man in 1951, and the special effects artists who worked on that film came to work on The Incredible Shrinking Man. They knew how to make things disappear or change size using optical effects and trick photography. But shrinking a man on screen was different from making him invisible. The team used miniature sets, oversized props, and clever camera tricks. They filmed Grant Williams against blue screens years before blue screen became common. They created dolls and puppets that looked exactly like Grant Williams so they could show him shrinking without showing the actor himself. Each effect took weeks to plan and days to film. The technology was old. The idea was new. The result was magic that looked real. Fact number 15. Richard Matheson rewrote the ending 3 different times. The ending of The Incredible Shrinking Man is one of the most beautiful and mysterious endings in science fiction cinema. But Richard Matheson wasn't happy with his ending at first. He wrote it one way. Then he rewrote it. Then he rewrote it again. The studio wanted an ending that showed hope. The original book had a strange, almost spiritual ending. The final film has an ending that asks questions instead of answering them. Scott doesn't disappear. He doesn't die. He becomes something else. He becomes part of everything. Richard struggled with how to show this without confusing the audience. He wanted the ending to feel like a door opening, not a door closing. When he finally got it right, he knew. Everyone who read it knew. That ending wasn't just different, it was revolutionary. Fact number 14. The basement scene was inspired by nightmares, not science. The basement sequence, where Scott fights a giant mouse, is one of the most intense scenes in the film. Jack Arnold came up with the idea after having a nightmare. He woke up feeling small and vulnerable in a world of giant objects. He wanted to put that exact feeling on screen, the feeling of being lost in a familiar place that suddenly became terrifying. The basement was a real set, but they made it look dangerous and strange through camera angles and lighting. The mouse wasn't actually giant, it was a real mouse filmed in close-up, or a puppet, or a combination. What mattered was how it made Scott look. What mattered was the fear in his eyes. Jack Arnold understood that the scariest monsters aren't always the ones that look real. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones inside our nightmares made visible. Fact number 13. Grant Williams wore different costumes as he got smaller. As Scott Carey shrank, his clothes had to shrink too. The costume department made multiple versions of every outfit, the same shirt, the same pants, the same shoes, but in different sizes. Grant Williams would wear different costumes on different days depending on how small Scott was supposed to be in that scene. Changing costumes dozens of times took hours. The continuity had to be perfect. If Scott was wearing a striped shirt in one scene, he had to wear the exact same striped shirt in the next scene, just smaller. The costume department kept detailed records and photographs so they wouldn't make mistakes. What looked simple on screen, a man in shrinking clothes, required incredible organization and attention to detail behind the camera. Fact number 12. The script didn't have a happy ending, and some people hated that when test audiences first watched The Incredible Shrinking Man, some people walked out angry. They wanted Scott Carey to find a cure. They wanted him to become normal again. They wanted a traditional happy ending where the hero wins and everything returns to how it was. But Richard Matheson and Jack Arnold refused to give them that. Scott doesn't get better. Scott changes. Scott learns to accept something that can't be fixed. Some viewers found this beautiful and profound. Some viewers found it depressing and unsatisfying. The studio was nervous about releasing a movie with such an unusual ending. They were afraid it wouldn't make money. But they released it anyway, and something amazing happened. The movie found an audience that understood what it was really about. It wasn't about curing a disease, it was about accepting change. Fact number 11. The movie became a metaphor for feeling powerless in modern life. After the film came out, people started talking about it differently than other science fiction movies. They said it was really about getting older. It was about losing your strength. It was about becoming less important in a world that values big things. Scott Carey's shrinking represented something universal, the fear that we're becoming smaller, less powerful, less relevant as we age, or as life changes us. Richard Matheson hadn't set out to make a metaphor, he had set out to tell a story. But stories have a way of meaning more than their creators intended. The movie became a way for people to process their own fears about time, power, and mortality. A science fiction story about a man shrinking became a story about the human condition. That's the power of good storytelling. Fact number 10. The laboratory equipment was bought from real scientific supply companies. When Scott Carey goes to scientists for help, he enters laboratories filled with authentic equipment. The filmmakers didn't create fake machinery. They bought real scientific instruments from real companies that supplied universities and research hospitals. They rented electron microscopes. They borrowed centrifuges. They used real lab equipment to make the laboratories look absolutely authentic. This choice cost more money, but it made the movie feel believable. When Scott talks to the scientists, we believe the scientists because they're surrounded by real things. The sets look like actual places where science happens. Modern movies use computers to create fake equipment. In 1957, the filmmakers used real equipment because it was the most honest way to tell the story. That wasn't being cheap. That was being smart. Fact number 9. Grant Williams, trained like an athlete to prepare for the physical role. Grant Williams knew he would spend weeks lying in miniature sets, squeezing into tiny spaces, and acting terrified. So he trained like a professional athlete preparing for a difficult competition. He worked with movement coaches. He did flexibility exercises. He practiced holding uncomfortable positions for long periods. He learned how to fall safely when cameras positioned around him could catch him from any angle. He trained his breathing so he could act emotional while being physically cramped and uncomfortable. Most actors read a script and show up on set. Grant Williams prepared his body for the role like a dancer prepares for a difficult performance. His physical training made his performance more believable because his body knew how to move through impossible situations. Fact number 8. The Neighbor Lady was based on Jack Arnold's own neighbor. The character of Louise Carey, Scott's wife, wasn't created from imagination alone. Jack Arnold based her personality partly on his own neighbor, a woman he knew personally who lived near him in Los Angeles. He took specific details about her manner of speaking, her personality, and her way of moving and gave them to the actress who played Louise. This made Louise feel like a real person, not just a character. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't completely sympathetic. She had flaws. She had her own needs. She loved Scott, but his shrinking frightened her. Jack understood that real relationships aren't simple, and he wanted Louise to be complicated and real. What looked like a simple supporting character was actually built from real human observation. Fact number 7. The movie almost starred a different actor, and everything would have changed before Grant Williams was cast. Other actors were considered for the role of Scott Carey. Each of them would have brought something different to the character. Grant Williams had a certain kind of face, vulnerable but strong, young but serious. He had a voice that could convey both confidence and fear. He had the physical build to look believable in both normal-sized and miniature sets. The filmmakers tested other actors, but they kept coming back to Grant. He understood the character's inner journey. He could show Scott's emotional changes as his body changed. What looked like a simple casting choice was actually crucial to making the film work. Another actor might have made Scott seem weak or pathetic. Grant made Scott seem human and heroic. Fact number 6. The movie's score was composed by someone who had never written a horror film before. The music for The Incredible Shrinking Man was composed by Irving Gertz, and this was one of his first times scoring a science fiction or horror-adjacent film. Irving usually composed lighter music for television and small films. But Jack Arnold believed that Irving had the sensitivity to create music that was beautiful and unsettling at the same time. The score needed to sound scary without sounding cartoonish. It needed to sound sad without sounding depressing. Irving created a score that became one of the most memorable parts of the film. His themes for Scott Carey became iconic. The main theme sounds small and vulnerable, almost like it's played by a child's instruments. What looked like an unusual choice became a brilliant decision that shaped how audiences felt about the movie. Fact number 5. The relationship between Scott and his wife was based on real marriage problems. Richard Matheson didn't just invent the conflict between Scott and his wife Louise from his imagination. He based it partly on conversations with married couples and partly on his own observations of how marriage changes when one person faces a crisis. When Scott starts shrinking, Louise doesn't know how to help him. She feels angry. She feels scared. She feels guilty. She wants to leave sometimes, but she stays. This is what real relationships look like when crisis happens. They're not simple. They're not perfectly supportive. They're messy and honest, and sometimes they break. Richard wanted audiences to understand Louise's perspective, not just Scott's. He wanted people to see how Scott's suffering affected everyone around him. The movie became a portrait of a marriage under impossible pressure, not just a story about a man getting smaller. Fact number 4. The ending script was kept secret from everyone except key people. Jack Arnold and Richard Matheson decided to keep the ending of the screenplay completely secret from most of the cast and crew. Only the most essential people knew how the movie would end. Grant Williams didn't know exactly what was coming. The actresses who played Louise didn't know what would happen to Scott. This secrecy was intentional because Jack wanted the performances to feel genuinely uncertain. If actors knew the ending ahead of time, they might perform differently. They might try to foreshadow it. They might change how they played their scenes. By keeping the ending secret, Jack made sure that performances stayed fresh and honest. When test audiences saw the ending, they were shocked. When critics saw the ending, they were moved. The surprise and mystery were built into the production itself, not just into the story. Fact number 3. The movie was released during a time when Americans were terrified of radiation. The Incredible Shrinking Man came out in 1957, just 12 years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. Americans were worried about radiation. Radioactive fallout from nuclear testing was in the news. People were building bomb shelters. Children were having drills in schools about nuclear attacks. Into this fearful time came a movie about a man exposed to radiation who starts shrinking. The movie wasn't directly about nuclear weapons, but audiences understood the message. Science that seemed safe could be dangerous. Technology that seemed powerful could destroy us. Scott's exposure to radiation wasn't shown as an attack, it was an accident. That made it scarier, because it showed that danger could come from anywhere. The movie spoke to anxieties that were very real in 1957 America. Fact number 2. The film was nominated for an Academy Award, but audiences didn't know it at first. The Incredible Shrinking Man was nominated for Best Special Effects at the Academy Awards in 1958. This was a significant achievement for a science fiction film. Science fiction movies weren't always taken seriously by the Academy. But the special effects in this film were so impressive, so technically perfect, that they couldn't be ignored. The nomination came from the same institution that had ignored science fiction for years. It was a validation. It was proof that what the filmmakers had created was genuinely impressive. Some people didn't think the movie deserved the nomination because it was just a science fiction movie. But others understood that the special effects weren't just tricks. They were art. They told the story. They made audiences believe the impossible. The nomination recognized that science fiction could be serious cinema. Fact number 1. The final scene was so unusual that some theaters cut it off because they thought the film broke the ending of The Incredible Shrinking Man is unlike any other ending in science fiction cinema. Scott doesn't disappear in a normal way. The camera pulls back and back and back. The world becomes smaller and smaller. Eventually, Scott is gone. But not dead. Not cured. Just gone. In some early screenings, the film ended and many audience members thought something was wrong. They thought the projector had broken. They thought the film had been damaged. Theater managers got complaints. Some theaters even cut off the ending because they assumed it was a mistake. It wasn't until critics started writing about the ending that audiences understood it was intentional. Richard Matheson and Jack Arnold had created an ending that was so different, so challenging, that people literally didn't know what they were watching. That wasn't a problem. That was genius. The audience's confusion became part of the experience. Bonus fact: the optical effects team kept detailed notebooks about every effect they created. Hidden in the Universal Studios archive are notebooks filled with handwritten calculations and sketches from the optical effects team. These notebooks show exactly how they created each effect: measurements, camera angles, distances between props and actors, light settings, and timing calculations. One notebook has 47 pages about just the first scene where Scott realizes he's getting smaller. The team drew diagrams showing where Grant Williams should stand, how close the camera should be, and how the light should fall on his face. They calculated exact measurements for miniature sets based on real sets using mathematical ratios. They tested effects multiple times before filming them for real. No computer helped them. No digital tools existed. They used mathematics, experience, and intuition. The notebooks show that special effects in 1957 required not just creativity, but incredible precision and technical knowledge. Old tools, new magic. The Incredible Shrinking Man is more than a science fiction movie. It's a story about fear and change and accepting what we cannot control. It's a story about a man who loses his body but finds his humanity. It's a story about how the smallest person can contain the biggest questions. Grant Williams, Jack Arnold, and Richard Matheson created something that audiences still watch and still think about nearly 70 years later. The special effects were remarkable for 1957, but the real effect of this movie is on the human heart. It makes us think about what makes us human when everything else is taken away. It makes us feel small in the universe and somehow larger for feeling that smallness. If you enjoyed these stories and these secrets about the Incredible Shrinking Man, please subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the greatest stories are told by people bold enough to shrink the world down to something we can finally understand.